Hello, I am Professor Richard Schuster. I am a professor of global health at the University of Haifa in Israel, and I am the co-director of the International Master's Degree of Public Health MPH program at the University of Haifa. Today we're going to have an introductory discussion about the use of systems analysis tools for strategic evaluation of healthcare organizations. There are a number of tools, and we're going to go through some of them. In addition, I'd like to just review our goals. We want to start by understanding some of the traditional tools that have been available for a very long time. And then we will move on and we will talk about some of the relatively newer and more complex tools that can also be used. Finally, we will have a brief example of the use of a tool for the purposes of understanding how these tools can be used in a practical situation. So this briefly presents our goals, and incidentally, in addition to this presentation, the PowerPoint itself will be available for viewing as a separate PowerPoint. Next, we're going to talk about the value of using tools in health systems. And specifically, one can say that health systems are very expensive, they're very complex. There is a tremendous stress on the funds available for taking care of people, whether it's a medical care system or more of a public health system. And there's just a great opportunity to use systems tools to more carefully and appropriately evaluate health systems to improve the value, which is to say to improve efficiency and to lower cost. And these tools can be used in large organizations, medium or small organizations. So let's start by talking about the traditional tools that are often used in strategic analysis. We're going to talk about the SWOT, the McKinsey 7, force field analysis, and scenario planning. These are examples. There are many others, but this at least will give you an idea of the kinds of tools that are available. So the SWOT analysis is probably the most commonly used, and it's very effective for organizations who are in the process of reviewing their status to deliver useful and efficient evaluation of the organization. So an individual can do this, a committee can, or a large group of people who are appointed to represent the organization can do so. And what simply happens is you say, what are the strengths of our organization? What are the weaknesses of our organization? What opportunities are there for us to improve the organization? And then finally, what are the threats? The SWOT or SWOT analysis. And usually people come up with maybe 4 or 5, maybe as many as 10 bullets or points for each of these. Once they've been identified, then they can be, sometimes can be addressed. Sometimes they're too big to address immediately. Other times they can be acted on. The point is you're focusing in using this tool to have a better understanding of your organization. The McKinsey 7 was developed by the McKinsey consulting firm, and as you can see, the key thing is for organizations to identify their shared values. However, the facets of the organization that get focused on include the structure, the strategy, the skills, the staff, the style, and the systems. And as you can see, each one of these key things interacts with all of the others. often a strategic planning process is used, which can be day-long or multiple days, and teams of people might be assigned each of these, and then ultimately the shared values are investigated and determined. Another interesting example of a traditional strategic systems analysis tool is the force field analysis. And basically, the argument with a force field analysis is that everything is the way it is because there are forces pushing one way and forces pushing another. And one of the points to make is that these are restraining forces. These are the forces that maintain the status quo. And the driving forces are the forces that are interested in pushing toward a more changed environment. And what a typical force field analysis does is takes and breaks down various factors that are the forces for change, and then the opposing forces resisting change. And so you take each of these various factors, you identify them, and parenthetically, it's been proposed that if you can reduce the resisting change, it takes much less energy in an organization than forcing the change from the other side. So here's another example. This is the status quo. This is where we would like the organization to be. We look at the driving forces pushing it. We look at the restraining forces resisting it. And again, either pushing further or withdrawing this restraining force will move this process over to the desired state. Here you will see an example that shows how these things are used. In some organizations, they actually put numerical value on the power or strength of each of these issues on both sides. Force field analysis, relatively easy to do and can be very valuable. Scenario planning is more complex. In scenario planning, a series of possibilities are raised. What scenes, what scenarios could occur to our organization? And if we can go through and predict what might happen if one of those scenarios does occur, then we will be prepared to respond. Large corporations, for example, will go through scenario planning, but a smaller or medium-sized organization can as well. So in this case, we've said, okay, we're going to have 4 scenarios, A, B, C, and D. What happens if A occurs? What do we do? What happens if B occurs? And so forth. So, for example, if we were doing strategic planning, let's say in a Ministry of Health, scenario A might be, what if there's a financial crisis in the Ministry of Health? All of a sudden, the budget has been reduced. Let's say there's a recession. Or the opposite. Maybe there are new funds coming in that come from taxes, let's say, and result in a budget increase from the Ministry of Health. A new political party comes in and gives more money to the Ministry of Health. Scenario C, maybe there's an epidemic that occurs and will have this huge impact on the population. How do we, as an organization, prepare for it? Or another example might be, how do we deal with an influx of refugees into our country or our region, and let's plan for that. So that's scenario planning. Now, we are going to move on and go over and at least mention some of the newer tools in strategic analysis for systems. Appreciate that these are more complex, and as you can see from this diagram, here's an example. This one is called a causal loop diagram, and you can appreciate that this diagram came from Columbia University, and you're welcome to investigate it more fully. The internet is filled with all sorts of examples of the use of all of these tools, and we appreciate Columbia University's contribution to describing a causal loop diagram. And simply put, you identify some situation and you say, what are the factors that cause it? And obviously, in a complex organization, the factors are complex. So you have all these different loops, and by understanding what affects what, you can proceed to improve it. This is a very simple explanation of what is actually a rather complex situation. Similarly, the participatory impact pathways analysis is a complex but valuable tool. And as you can see, the PIPA process, again, is complex. And if you're interested in learning about it, I recommend that you go and get more information. I'm not going to take the time to explain it in detail. I would like to take a little while and talk about learning organizations. The person who is credited with this is a man named Peter Senge, who was certainly very well known in the management world, and he contends that a successful organization is a learning organization. And more specifically, what he contended was that organizations that are successful are continuously learning, which is to say they're continuously attempting to improve their processes. And these are some of the examples of how learning organizations function. But the summary is to talk about a learning loop, and that in a continuous learning organization, there is continuous process. Develop, refine, and identify performance measures. Communicate the information immediately. Share it with the right people. Motivate people to improve performance, then monitor it, and then on it goes. This continuous loop is one of the high points of the learning organization. Another is an inventory an innovation history, and I'm just mentioning it as another example of one of quite a number of tools. Now, what we're going to go over now is something called process mapping. And this is the last tool we're going to mention, and I'm going to just take a little while to explain to you how this tool works. So what you do in process mapping is you study the flow of work. So you have some particular process, can be big, can be small. Maybe it's delivering vaccines to from the CDC in the United States to Rwanda or Zambia. Maybe it's doing any other kind of process. And you take it and divide it into its component parts, study each of the parts, and you may be able to find ways to improve the delivery. We're going to go through an example of a project that I did some years ago. I was the director of a teaching clinic in the United States where we had medical students, residents, pharmacy students, and we had patients coming in for medical care, and the process was quite slow. People would come in, they would wait quite a while, as is often the case in a clinic that involves education. And yet we felt that if we could improve the flow of patients, they would be more satisfied, it would be good for everyone. So we decided to go through a process map. And this is an example of a process map. And I'm not going to take too long, but briefly mention to you, first of all, a patient would check in. And we took each step along the way. So then they would be called, they would enter an exam room, a medical assistant would bring them into that exam room and then leave them. Maybe they would leave with the medical assistant, let's say they had a blood pressure check, or more likely they would have to wait for the doctor, okay? And then the doctor would leave and come and go. Eventually the patient leaves the exam room. They might need to go to the toilet to leave a urine specimen. maybe they need to go to get their blood drawn, and then finally they check out. They might have to go to the pharmacy, and then ultimately they leave. What we did was we took these various parts, we created a form, and we had the patients time each of these steps, how long they as individuals had to wait to go from one step to the next. What we discovered was not a particular surprise, but the key bottleneck was related to the doctor's time and behavior, and some of that was related to the teaching process, with the doctor having to go in and out of the room. But also we discovered that the availability of our medical assistants had an impact. The details aren't particularly critical. What is important to understand is this is a workflow, and by identifying what the blockages were, the slowdowns, we were able to fix it. For example, we learned that in the morning when there were more medical assistants, the process worked more efficiently. These are references that you're welcome to look at, and we're done. So thank you very much for joining me in learning about just an introduction to the use of systems tools in health systems, and I hope that this will get you involved and help you work with your organization in improving the delivery of healthcare. Bye-bye.